It began like any other high-profile interview on Good Morning America, with the usual polished tone and an air of civility. Meghan Markle was introduced as a humanitarian mother and former royal, and George Stephanopoulos, known for his calm demeanor and incisive questions, welcomed her with a smile that seemed genuine but firm. As cameras rolled and the segment opened, Meghan responded with ease to initial questions about her foundation, her recent projects, and her hopes for the future. Yet beneath the surface, the tone felt off-tight, almost rehearsed. Follow-up questions started growing sharper, circling back to controversial claims she had made in past interviews. He referenced specific inconsistencies, including statements about royal family dynamics, the timeline of events around their royal exit, and her relationships with former staff. Meghan maintained her composure but began showing signs of unease. Her answers grew lengthier, more careful, her smile strained. Viewers sensed that this wasn't going to be a typical softball segment. George, clearly prepared, was steering toward confrontation. Every question felt like a step toward something much heavier, and Meghan could feel it coming. She shifted in her seat slightly, crossed her legs differently, blinked more often, her subtle tells visible to an audience now watching closely. The atmosphere changed from polite interest to something electric, something charged. George leaned forward, voice even but unrelenting, and asked, "There have been questions about whether the story you and Prince Harry have been telling is consistent. Are you willing to address the gaps?" Meghan looked briefly stunned, then quickly composed herself. "We've always spoken our truth," she said, the phrase polished and familiar. But George wasn't accepting platitudes. "And yet your truth seems to evolve with each interview. Is it truth or narrative?" The question lingered. Meghan's eyes narrowed just slightly. "What we've said reflects our lived experiences," she replied, a practiced answer. But George came prepared with clips, dates, and documented contradictions. He mentioned her claims of being silenced, then brought up multiple public statements, podcast appearances, and a best-selling memoir. He asked why someone claiming to have been voiceless had in fact had one of the largest platforms in the world for years. Meghan attempted to pivot to her charity work, to speak about mental health and advocacy. But George pressed, "How do you reconcile speaking about compassion while calling members of your family liars on global television?" Meghan's tone shifted. That wasn't an attack, it was clarification. But the audience could see the defensiveness creeping in. Her answers grew shorter, her posture tighter. George had cracked the first layer. The segment was scheduled for 20 minutes. But already the energy in the room was thick. Meghan tried to reset the tone. "Let's talk about solutions. What I really want is to focus on how we move forward, how we elevate communities, support women's voices." George gave a courteous nod but didn't let go of the thread. "Of course," he said, "but you've also built a brand on personal transparency. Do you feel you've been fully transparent? Yourself?" Meghan paused longer this time. "I think transparency is about emotional honesty," she said. George countered. "Or is it selective vulnerability?" The studio audience reacted subtly. Meghan's expression flickered 1 second calm, the next guarded. She adjusted her blazer, composed herself, and said, "I won't apologize for protecting my peace. But can you expect credibility while avoiding accountability?" George followed, smooth but pointed. "Right." Meghan's brows furrowed. "Are you suggesting I haven't owned my story?" she asked. "I'm suggesting the story keeps changing," George replied. Silence. For a few beats, neither spoke. Meghan broke it with a soft, slightly defensive laugh and tried again to refocus on positive themes. But the power dynamic had shifted. For the first time in years, someone was interviewing her without fear, and it was happening live. George moved next to the Netflix docuseries, calling it a fascinating blend of confession and curation. Meghan smiled tightly. It was a chance to show our side.
George nodded.
And yet many viewers felt it was overly produced. Did it reflect reality or a controlled version of it? Meghan responded quickly. "It was our reality." George followed, "But reality doesn't usually include editorial oversight and multiple camera angles, does it?" The audience tensed. Meghan blinked, then offered, "We wanted it to be beautiful and honest." "Some say you chose beauty over honesty," George replied. The remark hit harder than expected. Meghan's response was measured, but her tone betrayed her. "I've always tried to live authentically," George pushed. "Then why do so many people close to you feel misrepresented?" Meghan looked away for a split second, just enough to register discomfort. "Not everyone will understand your journey," she said. "But when the same pattern emerges across different relationships, doesn't that raise questions?" George added. A subtle gasp came from off-camera. Meghan inhaled, clearly frustrated. "I won't engage in character assassinations." "But you've participated in them," George shot back. The room fell still. Asterisk at this point, Meghan was no longer smiling. Her tone was formal, her body language defensive. She spoke about her children, how her only goal was to give them a safe, honest life. George acknowledged that. "I believe that," he said, "but do you believe your public approach actually fosters that safety, or does it draw more scrutiny?" Meghan hesitated. "We can't live in hiding," she said. "But does that justify turning personal pain into public content?" George countered. Meghan's hands clasped tightly in her lap. "We've used our experiences to help others," she said. George pulled up charity figures, press metrics, comparing coverage to actual impact. "Do you think the media attention has overshadowed the mission?" Meghan stiffened. "We can't control the media," she insisted. "But you've hired media firms, produced documentaries, signed multi-million-dollar deals. That's not accidental exposure, that's strategy." McGann's voice sharpened. "So you're accusing me of what, being too visible?" "No," George said calmly. "I'm asking what's more important, visibility or credibility?" Meghan didn't answer. Not immediately. And that pause, silent, uneasy, spoke volumes. Asterisk. To regain footing. Meghan pivoted to racism, gender bias, and institutional silencing. She spoke passionately about being a woman of color in a predominantly white institution and the psychological toll it took. George listened attentively, even nodding. "That's valid," he acknowledged. "But do you think some of those truths have been diluted by inconsistent messaging?" Meghan pushed back. "I've always spoken from the heart." "But isn't intention different from perception?" he replied. "You may mean well, but do you consider how your audience hears you?" Meghan countered. "We can't be responsible for every misinterpretation." "But when patterns repeat, does that still count as misinterpretation or misrepresentation?" George asked. Her eyes narrowed. "Oh, you're twisting this," she said, the first real flash of anger. "No," he said evenly. "I'm asking what people are already wondering." Meghan folded her arms, then unfolded them. She clearly wasn't expecting this level of scrutiny. "I didn't come here to be attacked," she said finally. "And I didn't invite you to be unchallenged," George replied. The audience sat in stunned silence. Asterisk, the producer signaled 2 minutes remaining, but neither host nor guest slowed. Meghan insisted her public efforts were rooted in healing and progress. George acknowledged that again, but returned to one final point. "If you believe in healing, would you consider a private apology to your family?" Meghan visibly recoiled. "Why should I apologize for telling the truth?" she asked. "Because truth can still hurt," George said. "And healing sometimes starts with humility." Meghan shook her head slowly. "We've endured enough. We've been attacked from all sides." "But is that justification for your own attacks?" he asked. The question hung like fog. Meghan's jaw clenched. "I have nothing to apologize for," she said flatly. George nodded slightly, then turned to the camera. "That's all the time we have." The show cut to commercial. Meghan stood stiffly, thanked George with a handshake, and exited the studio with her team. In that 20-minute span, a media storm had been born. One that wouldn't settle for days. Asterisk, social media exploded. Clips of the exchange went viral within minutes. Some praised Meghan's poise, others labeled her evasive. George was trending globally, half as a hero, half as a villain. PR analysts immediately dissected the segment. It wasn't an interview, one pundit said. It was a public reckoning. GMA's ratings surged. Meghan's team released a carefully worded statement hours later, calling the exchange a missed opportunity for compassion and an example of biased journalism. George did not respond directly, but defended the interview on Nightline that evening, stating asking difficult questions is not Biasit's responsibility. That soundbite alone got millions of views. Meanwhile, Meghan canceled her next scheduled appearance and went radio silent for several days. Behind the scenes, sources reported tension between her and Harry. The couple's media advisors were allegedly divided, some pushing for a counter-interview, others urging total silence. The public, however, had already made up its mind. Conversation had changed, and Meghan was no longer in control of it. In 2Re's M podcast,